Welcome to our webinar, Stop Reactive Portfolio Management, How to Anticipate Risks and Stay Ahead of Change. If you enjoy this topic, please explore our YouTube channel for more videos and follow us on LinkedIn to be in the know for event announcements and speaking engagements. Presenting today's discussion is OnePlan's Scott Daly.
Thanks to everybody for joining us today. Normally when we do kind of demonstrations and do presentations, we invite questions when it's more one-on-one scenario. So please, any questions you have, feel free to send them in. We will get back to you on those. And if for some reason, and you'll hear me say this multiple times throughout this webinar, if for some reason you think you need a more customized or tailored demo, we're absolutely happy to do it. So how to anticipate risks and stay ahead of change. Portfolio management can be more than a list of projects. So what does this mean? And again, I'll repeat this at a couple junctures through this webinar as well, but a lot of times, and I've worked with a ton of clients and I've implemented it at a ton of places. A lot of times there is a tendency to just go for the lowest hanging fruit, which is, listen, we don't know what our organization is doing. We need a central list somewhere that leadership can look at. And that's absolutely terrific. And it is ultimately, for a lot of organizations that are working in spreadsheets and disparate systems, a huge step up. But it is well short of what portfolio management could actually do. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and in terms of conceptualizing those things, both as risks and in terms of change, which is continuous, but also in terms of how you might look at portfolio management differently, and hopefully in a way that is more value added and provides more return on investment. We'll also do a lot of OnePlan demonstration. It will be a light gloss of features. We will not dig into things specifically, but it is designed to kind of provide a survey quickly in reference to this topic. And then hopefully, if there's any further questions, you guys will circle back. And then ultimately, of course, we'll drive this towards conclusion. So what is OnePlan? OnePlan is a software company and a consulting company, although we are primarily driven by happy clients who like to continue their subscriptions. We're not a new company. We've been around for at least 10 years, and we're recognized across the tech industry by various other consulting companies. So if there's any questions about things like privacy or anything like that, or where we're hosting this and those kinds of things, please, again, feel free to come back and ask questions, but I think you'll be very happy with all the answers. We've been around for a long time. All right, conceptualizing risk and change. Why attempt to manage risk and change at all? Again, I kind of wanted to say this in contrast with how we often see things implemented, where maybe a client steps in, again, asking just merely to know what people are working on, or, for example, you want to be able to have a timesheet system that can track time so you know what people have done. There's this notion of managing risk and change, which are fundamentally forward thinking concepts. And with regard to that, we have kind of a basic spectrum of behaviors that I think, in a lot of organizations gets lost. Now, kind of classifying it this way, of course, people are going to, say, look, accounting isn't strictly what happened. It can be used to predict what will happen, for example, if it's done well. Administration can be more than what is happening. And management, of course, can and is ultimately somewhat about administration and accounting as well. But when you conceptualize these things on a spectrum, you start to realize that when you implement a portfolio management system, it's more than simply, again, gathering time in a timesheet, for example. That would be what happened. And it's more than simply what is happening. And the notion of the present, let's say, is a little bit fungible. Let's just say it's this week. Management, though, is more than simply predicting what will happen, management ultimately is about making the future happen the way management wants it to. And this is really what leadership boils down to. And a lot of people get very uncomfortable with these concepts. Just making predictions about the future means you can be wrong. And a lot of people and a lot of organizations will instinctively shy away from anything that can be wrong. Likewise, owning the notion that the future can be created and can be, more than predicted, it can be targeted and shaped, makes people extremely uncomfortable. But in the end, when we talk about risk and change and attempting to return on investment, this is exactly what we're talking about. We're not talking about what's going on today. We're not talking about what happened yesterday. We're saying we're going to make the future the way we want to make it. So with regard to with OnePlan, look, and again, I touched on this. What happened involves kind of timesheets, past status reports, trending, what is happening, current tasks, active projects, weekly status report, and what will happen, OKRs, risks, schedules, budgets. And again, I'm going to kind of pause on the right circle and say, look, and we'll demonstrate this in the product as well. But when you create an objective and key result and the metrics that go with it, it again is an attempt to get the organization to achieve those objectives in the future. Just saying them and applying measures will alter the way the future looks. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be successful, but that is what is actually happening. Along with that, you have the notion of risks. Why won't this objective be achieved? By identifying those risks and perhaps putting them in the schedule, having their own ownership, their own teams, their own notes, you are actually making an attempt to ensure that the objective is achieved. The schedule, which ironically is a very common thing, a Gantt chart, and we'll talk about this in the product as well, but the schedule, if you think about it, is two things. It is a crystal ball. It is a depiction of how the future will unfold. And it is an attempt to make that future unfold in that way. A lot of times, again, I think people put schedules together and they end up sitting on a shelf, or they end up kind of a static artifact, or they don't really even realize that in fact they are attempting to make the future that they want come into existence. But they are in fact a very powerful tool for doing exactly that. Thirdly, when we talk about budgets, again, often a dry, uninteresting topic. We'll show in OnePlan how, in fact, they're a dynamic tool for managing change and making sure that you get the future that you want. Okay, what is OnePlan, the software itself? There are a ton of features in OnePlan, a lot of which we are going to just gloss over today. We won't really touch on in any depth. Those can be the subject of another webinar. But ultimately, when we run through the major areas of OnePlan functionality, objectives and key results, idea capture, portfolio management, project and schedule management, resource capacity planning, financial budgeting, timesheets, and integrations. What you end up with is an end-to-end collaborative work management tool. And we'll talk a little bit about how we achieve that as we go forward as well. So OnePlan strategic portfolio management, of relevance to this particular webinar, it ultimately sits at the intersection of strategy, execution, and technology. Each one of these Venn circles involves a different rule in the company. Again, when we kind of do implementations, it's important that we think about why we're implementing and who our stakeholders are and who we implement them to. This seems very obvious, but it's so easy to get lost. And I'll give you an example that's from a completely different product, your CRM, Salesforce or Microsoft CRM, whatever it is, HubSpot. A lot of times, what you'll see in these tools is that they get configured for the business leader. That is, they get configured, crammed full of fields and metrics that all are consumed in a report at the end of the month by the business leader, and they completely lose sight of the fact that a CRM is supposed to be for the success of the individual salesperson, i.e. the salesperson wants to shorten their sales cycle and they want to close more deals, which of course ultimately benefits the business leaders. But you see a CRM implementation getting weighed down by the demands of the people who are sponsoring the project. Again, no surprise, but when you look at it, you can see this role confusion leads to a sideways implementation. Same thing will be the case with a strategic portfolio management tool like OnePlan. If you take the time to map out your stakeholders and understand why they're asking for what they are asking for, you can achieve what you need to achieve out of the system, which again, subject to this webinar, ultimately is to deal with the future and making it happen. Teams work according to their needs. OnePlan absolutely supports this aggressively. We give leadership what it needs, but we also give each team or enable each team to work in the tool set that it chooses to work in. And we'll talk about how we achieve that in another slide. But the short of this is we recognize that there is an agile methodology, there is a waterfall methodology, there are unknown methodologies, but they all need to be unified to drive toward the future that leadership wants. And in the case of OnePlan, we provide exactly that mechanism. How we do it, you may be wondering, while these are a lot of different methodologies, OnePlan covers a ton of ground, as I will show, but we recognize that we also have our limits. Consequently, we have a fully productized and usable and user configurable integration tool called OneConnect. And that tool provides pre-built connectors to a variety of products, data and field mapping, business rules, workflow scheduling, and logging, all the kinds of things that you might feel like need to be done custom or done inside your own organization. In fact, are maintained by OnePlan, wrapped up in a configurable environment, so you don't necessarily need to call OnePlan for consulting help every time something changes. This is a big key in terms of philosophy, in terms of working with OnePlan. Again, we are not in the business of dislodging what's working at an organization. What we'd like to do is look at what is working and make sure that we're at the same time serving the higher level purpose. Leveraging AI proactively using Sophia. So AI, of course, is an incredibly hot topic right now. No webinar would be complete without a reference to AI. We are going to focus specifically a little bit on AI with regard to change and risk assessment and forecasting. As you can see from this slide, I'm not going to read it out loud to you. What I will do in terms of this particular webinar is show a couple pre-recorded sessions of how Sophia works. I encourage you to start a free trial and use it yourself. Again, I'll say this at multiple points as well. If I'm making any claims that need validation or testing, we provide free trials. It's no problem to get one, and those claims can be validated easily on your side if that's what you need to do. Or you can call us back and we can do a demonstration in person. So leveraging AI proactively. We go down, we click on Sophia, we type in a question, analyze data to identify patterns, opportunities, and potential risks. And again, Sophia is context aware, so it is working on the screen that she has in front of her, and it is providing a feedback based on what ultimately is underneath is a variation of ChatGPT. But ultimately, it is fully incorporated in the product itself is really the key. So if you want help using or having an analysis as a starting point, it's right there at your fingertips. Same thing goes, for example, if you wanted to say, look, I want to look at risks in particular. So I'm going to show the risks for this schedule. Again, Sophia is context aware. Ask for potential risks within this, and she will crank out a basic set of potential risks. No real magic here, or at least is very magical. And if this was 2015, but here in 2025, I think everybody's familiar with how this works. But it gives this excellent starting point. And again, it is fully incorporated into the product. So not only are you able to ask these questions, you're able to ask these questions about your own schedule. All right, so at this point, we are going to go into our demonstration. We're going to go through, like I said, a subset of major functionality. We're going to look at objectives and key results, basics of portfolio forecasting, scheduling, resource capacity planning, financial budget, and portfolio modeling. This last point may be the most powerful tool in the entire OnePlan suite. It is used for creating scenarios, possible scenarios, and comparing the outcomes of those scenarios. I generally advise clients that you can take what often is weeks of work and collapse it into a couple hours. It is then possible to export the results, and I'll repeat this, it's possible to export the results to Excel or to PowerPoint or whatever else and do a little bit more massaging. But in the end, you will have achieved, the ability to show the impact of decisions across multiple scenarios, the possible impact of decisions across multiple scenarios in a very reasonable amount of time, and you're able to react to changes in a very reasonable amount of time, in contrast with kind of the old way. Okay, with that, I'm going to shift over to the demo. All right, this is OnePlan. If we end up doing a one-on-one demo, we will kind of spend more time talking about navigation in more detail, but for the purposes of this particular webinar, we will gloss over a lot of these items. There are a couple keys to understanding OnePlan and how it comes together. Number one, we have multiple plan types. This is a concept that is very powerful and underlies a lot of how OnePlan functions. There's not only a project and then roll-ups, for example. Each one of these nodes is fully configurable, and each one carries its own logic and its own metadata. And I'll talk about that a little bit, but we won't dwell on it. The other thing that is a piece that you'll see appear over and over again in OnePlan is this ability to look at things in terms of lists, in terms of a Kanban board, or in terms of a roadmap, or finally in terms of a dashboard. Again, these things will appear over and over, so you will see these same things again and again. Okay, I should be showing the Gantt chart here. Let's show it real quickly. Yes, okay, good. And of course, everybody is familiar with the Gantt chart. Again, in terms of what we can say about this, in terms of risk and change management, the Gantt chart can be configured to show risks. Now, how is that possible in a system where a risk is not a task? That is a great question, and we will cover that. But the short answer is risk is also a work type. So it is more than a task. It is a more configurable object that can appear in the schedule or not. It can have a team associated with it or not. It can have its own schedule associated with it or not. So again, I kind of want to emphasize there is this iterative aspect of OnePlan, very powerful, that allows you to do a lot of things that are much more difficult in tools that are not specifically built for managing a portfolio. Down the left-hand side, you can see we've got some icons and some navigation. Our demos are configured for the purposes of demonstration. What a specific user will see is actually much more narrow. So when you either do it yourself or work with OnePlan Consulting, your user roles will be much more focused and narrowly defined, and they will see much less complexity. But for the purposes of demo, we make sure that I can easily get to everything. So I'm going to click on this My Strategy icon, and I'm going to go into our objective and key result functionality. So again, you'll notice that the plan types have changed to objectives and key results. We've got a different hierarchy, but it is the same feature set. This allows us, again, to do kind of iterative things that we wouldn't otherwise. I'm going to drill down into this very quickly. If you see this little hamburger over here, again, something you'll see repeated forever or over and over in OnePlan, you'll notice that if I come in, I can do a quick edit. I'm just going to open this quickly. It has this object. The objective has its own workflow. It has its own set of fields, again, all completely configurable, its own groupings, etc., and its own key results. Now, again, we'll kind of show that this repeats itself in different implementations, but the point I want to make is that it's completely configurable depending on what your organization needs, including each one having its own workflow. I'm going to open up this key result, which contributes to this objective. And right away, I can see that I'm in a position to consider this key result not as an isolated entity, but in the context of what must come before, what must happen now, and what will ultimately be enabled in the future. Again, kind of a key concept in terms of managing change and or risk. What am I able to consider as I attempt to achieve this particular objective? What am I able to impact as it goes down the line? I'm also able to look at this in terms of other configurations, again, completely configurable. But if I look at the objective, improve IT infrastructure, I can see the key results associated with it, projects and or epics that might be, products and or applications that come out the other side. So again, in terms of a larger context, you're able to, for example, look at that work planner and see that it may be at risk or it may be underperforming, and consequently, it will not deliver the key result that it would need to. Again, I realize I'm glossing over all this very, very quickly. I hope that, again, if anybody has any particular questions, they come back and they're able to ask about that. Okay, on to the portfolio piece. You'll see again the plan type has changed. I'm going to go ahead and expand all these. At a glance, completely configurable columns across the top so that you're able to kind of have a basic status. This would be administrative. This is what is happening today, although you could configure your schedule health to be more predictive. If I come in and I look at this particular project, actually want to look at the details first of all. I see that I have a different workflow across the top. Again, completely configurable depending on what your entity is like. Scroll down, I can see the various bits of project information, project schedule, project effort, project health, including status trends. This is, of course, highlighting where we were and where we are today, but it doesn't take much imagination to realize that status trends can be projected into the future as well. Accomplishments, planned activities, etc. The financials for the project. This is an area that I promised to cover earlier. This is a completely separate and or dependent, it depends on what your business process is, mechanism for predicting and managing the future. So you can see in this particular view, what we have are some cost categories down the side. And we have a spreadsheet-like format over here for allocating budget and also comparing it to actuals. Again, this is a configurable piece. We can compare budget to various things, including forecasts, et cetera. Again, be in a position where you can look into the future and see how you're actually performing against your budget. But this is maybe the simplest and most straightforward mechanism for planning in the entire product. And yes, you can roll these up, you can roll these down. In each case, you've got the basics for a schedule with very minimal effort that can then be compared to what actually happens or what we actually think is going to happen based on the project schedule today. Okay. The work plan, which is probably a little bit more familiar to people. And I'll come back here and take a look at the schedule. And I want to open everything up. And let's take a look at the Gantt chart on this as well. Where is this? Gantt. We're not going to dwell on the use of the Gantt chart in terms of this particular project, but to make this point, so this schedule, which again is an attempt to shape and create the future, can be compared to what you, for example, budgeted. It can also be compared to what your resource capacity planning requires. But you have the basics of what you would expect to see in terms of achieving that as a proactive measure. Now, where it gets more interesting in terms of this particular webinar is that we can do the same thing with risks, with backlog, with changes, so with key decisions. So I'm going to just quickly glance at risks, and you'll notice that the work type has changed to risks. And you'll notice, however, that we have the same basic hamburger functionality. I can do a quick look at what this risk is, again, completely configurable. I can assign resources, I can assign predecessors, I can take notes on the risk, I can have whatever fields that I need in order to work with that risk management piece. I can come in and I can have a comment history. I can come in and I can have a task list, a simple task list for this risk that does not have to appear in the schedule. It can just be the basics of what somebody needs to get done in order to mitigate this risk, or should the risk become an actual issue, to take care of that. It can also appear in the schedule as its own item, as its own risk item, if that makes sense. And again, I hope that the impression you're taking is that the risk management piece can be extremely powerful without really adding a ton of complexity, because again, it can be its own thing, or it can be a very simple piece that you simply add into the schedule. Same thing goes for changes. So you are able to track changes to the project. It again has its own edit. You can look at various customizable fields. You could assign resources, predecessors, take notes on the change. You can have comments, a list of activities. Again, I hope at this point where it's clear that if you are actually working with these things, that you have a huge amount of functionality that's available, at least as robust as any task management functionality. Okay. I'm going to come back out at this point and look at the portfolio and look at the board. So as I said, you are able to view tasks and or projects and or portfolios as a set of cards. These are drag and droppable. You have a configurable set of rows and you have a configurable set of columns, depending on how you want to manage your project. If you don't want to work with a list at all, if instead you want to work strictly with Kanban, you're free to do so. But it is the same data and it works the same, and it provides the same bit of functionality. It's just presented in a way that is more comfortable in certain organizations. We also, of course, at the top level, provide a roadmap, one of the key tools for actually managing the future. At this point, you are able to see what is going on today and what your roadmap looks like going forward. Again, completely configurable in terms of rows and columns. And finally, the basic question should be asked, well, can we aggregate this information in different ways across all of the projects and or all of the portfolios? And the answer is, of course, yes, we can, which is a wonderful piece of this. This is ultimately what we promised, that across all of your work and effort, you're able to provide a dashboard that somebody can use in order to make meaningful decisions. And you can see across the bottom here, there's tons of possible dashboards. And your reporting tool of choice is fine, by the way. There's no secret sauce. So if you're using Power BI, if you're using Click, if you're using something else, all of that will be available to you the same way. So whatever your in-house expertise is, you're covered. Finally, the modeler. As I started out earlier saying, I think this is maybe the most powerful tool that OnePlan provides for shaping and predicting the future. You can see here that we have multiple models. Each model has a set of assumptions surrounding why it was created. So you can come in, you can create an infinite number of models effectively, depending on what you're doing. I'm going to go ahead and click on this one. And in this case, the model was built with whatever constraints were made, budgeting, whatever it was that you wanted. Here's the list of projects. I have already two scenarios available, so I will go ahead and select one of the scenarios. Sure. I can see what I've pushed out, what I've chosen not to do, what I've kept in. I can also do things like look at what the resource demand is for this particular scenario. I can change this scenario and look at a separate scenario and see what the resource demand is on this one. Again, a lot more green than previously. I'm able to look at this in terms of what the connections are in terms of these projects in this particular scenario. But maybe most interestingly, I'm able to look at each one of these scenarios and compare them. So I'm able to look at strategic objective 1 and strategic objective 2, do a compare, see which projects are in, which projects are out, how I'm meeting my priorities and my strategic objectives in this case. And if I choose to, I'm able to export this to Excel and or PowerPoint in order to maybe make this look a little bit prettier, maybe carry this a little bit further, whatever. The upshot is that all of your data from your live system is available at your fingertips, and you can manipulate it into as many scenarios as you feel like, and you can compare those scenarios all without altering your core data. So if you're sitting in a room with your executive and your executive, she or he, says, hey, I want to do these 4 projects, but I don't want to do these 4 projects. You can show the impact of that scenario on the spot without making any real changes. You can delay these projects, you can add more resources, you can look at this in terms of budget. Then usually what happens is set objective, after they see the results of what they've asked for, they'll say, well, no, I don't want to do only 4 projects, I want to do 8 projects. How much is that going to cost me? Or how bad is our resourcing situation? How many people are we going to have to hire? You can do all that on the fly with your real data and also with potential projects, and do it in a matter of minutes, as opposed to, again, usually what it takes, which is weeks. And then again, if it needs to be modified and or polished, it can go back into a presentation or export it into a presentation. Okay. So that was our demo. If there were any questions or anything that needs further validation, please let us know. In terms of where we are, management is an active attempt to shape the future. I think this can't be emphasized enough. I think people shy away from this for good reason, but this really is what it is. OnePlan itself provides a comprehensive tool set to support that effort. Free trials are available to answer questions and validate claims. So if I've made a claim that seems like it's too good to be true, you should absolutely open up a trial and try for yourself, or get back a hold of us and demand that I demonstrate what I said. Please contact us with any questions. Free trials available at OnePlan.ai Solutions. You will see a list of templates. These are all just configuration templates. So in theory, anybody could build any of these templates themselves just by configuring the product. There is no secret sauce. You can go in and select the one that suits you the best. If you don't like that one, you can go in and start another trial and select a different one. There won't be any restriction on that. And there are a ton of online instructions to help you with this, make this choice and help you work through the trial as well. And with that, thank you. I'm glad you stayed with me through the whole thing, and please contact us with any questions.